Welcome back, guys, to another episode of The Ravens Watch. I am your host, as always, David Lee Corbo, a.k.a. The Raven, and today's guest here to help us make sense of Elon Musk and the impending alien invasion is Drew of Drutang Reborn on Twitter. How are you, brother?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me on, bro.
Of course, of course. Do you want to, before we jump into it, let the audience know where they can find you on your socials and things of that nature?
Yeah, it's basically just Twitter. So yeah, at Drutang Reborn. And then just my normal, whatever the title on there is, just Drew with 2 U's, DRUU. And yeah, that's basically where I post all my content. Luckily, thanks to our good friend Elon, it's the Everything app. So yeah, basically all my content's on there.
Yeah, it's interesting because Elon has given us, he sort of blessed us, right, with this social media app where it's sort of the wild, wild west again. We can go around and say what we like and post opinions that would have previously been dissenting and maybe worthy of a ban. And still you may get shadow banned now and again, but it does seem like it's X now, right? X is kind of the last bastion of free speech. And so people like you and a lot of other accounts that I follow. I've actually been a fan of your work now for a while. I've only been on Twitter since I think April. You were one of the first accounts I found, I believe, and you had a bunch of cool content, and you've kept it up since April. I'm sure you were doing the damn thing before I was there. But it is weird. It's interesting because there's this double-edged sword, right? It's like Elon is a highly suspicious character, and there are a lot of concerning things about Mr. Musk. But at the same time, if not for him, then a lot of these conversations wouldn't be being had.
Yeah, 100%. It's, what I always say about him is he's playing a really cool role. He's got probably the coolest role of anybody, in the last 2,000 years. So, I don't think there's anyone that you can point to that's been given credit for more, technological advancements. People forget that, his first company, it wasn't technically his first company. I believe it was his second, but X.com, which then turned into PayPal. Essentially, I believe there's like some type of a merger, but, essentially it turned into what PayPal is today, groundbreaking for online transactions and commerce. So, he did that. And then, of course, SpaceX and Tesla. So now he's basically running NASA. He's, he's revolutionized electric cars. And, yeah, he's revolutionized so many different aspects of life. And then, Starlink, too. Can't forget about Starlink, where he's literally, he's not only that, but he's also shaping the world wars right now because of his technology. He's able to give Ukraine an advantage. And then recently, catching flack because he wouldn't help them run a little like Pearl Harbor 2 on Russia in Crimea. So, which is, to get to the role part, that is a scene straight out of Iron Man 2, which anyone familiar with, how I approach the question of Elon Musk is by analyzing the predictive programming roles in the mainstream media that have basically prepared the population for such a hero or such a, an icon like Musk is. And I always point to Iron Man, and Iron Man 2, the movie that Elon Musk is actually in, he plays a cameo. It starts with Iron Man himself, Tony Stark, which, of course, Robert Downey Jr., the actor who plays Tony Stark, he literally said in an interview that he used Elon Musk's mannerisms to base the character off of. So in the movies, Robert Downey Jr. isn't playing the role of Tony Stark. He's playing the role of Elon Musk. He's literally trying to act as much like Elon Musk as he can. And And yeah, so essentially in that movie, it begins with Iron Man flying down into to do a presentation at the Stark Expo. And the X in Expo is capitalized. It's a different color. So there you go. Like, you know, all the X symbolism with Musk. But he talks about how he's basically brought world peace through his advanced technology in that speech. And then afterwards, he goes and he talks to Elon Musk in the movie. So that is basically what we just saw play out, where Elon Musk is basically, you know, turning the tides of the war.
Man, that's not to jump the gun, but if you fast forward through the series, who ends up saving us from the giant alien threat?
It is Iron Man. And, you know, most importantly, you know, not only is it just an alien threat, but it's also a depopulation plot where they want to get rid of half of the world's population, which notably you have the supervillain Bill Gates set up with, you know, obsessed with depopulation. And on the flip side, you have the good guy, Elon Musk, set up to, you know, in favor of, you know, having children. He literally says our biggest problem that we're facing is not overpopulation, but, you know, being below the replacement rate of reproduction.
Wow, that's interesting. I hadn't drawn that correlation yet, that he is fighting on two fronts, right? It's potentially this alien threat that's coming, but it's also, yeah, you're right. Elon Musk is one of the few public figures who has taken a stance in favor of having children, right? And he's ditching this narrative that resources are scarce and land is scarce and we're destroying the planet just by, you know, virtue of being on it. There is a lot.
And he's really good at it too. It was just revealed that he had yet another kid with Grimes that they just kept a complete secret. So he's literally, and he popped out another one with one of his employees, I think within the last year. So yeah, I think he has 10 or 11 now.
Right. So he's a big proponent of practice what you preach. He has his hands in so many influential things, right? You said it before, Starlink, which is, you know, a web of satellites surrounding the planet, providing everybody with internet. The Boring Company, is that still his, or has he sold that, where he's drilling these tremendous tunnels underground, trying to connect LA to New York or something of that nature? What else has he got? He's got Twitter.
He still has that.
Right. And then there's Neuralink, right, which is a terrifying prospect. That's the, you know, that's what, in my viewpoint, that's his prime project. That's the most important part. Because there's two aspects to Musk. His primary objectives, and this is what all the predictive programming points to as well, is he's ushering in a technocracy and transhumanism. So technocracy is ruled by the experts, which Elon Musk's grandfather in World War II Canada was actually arrested for being the leader of the technocracy party in Canada, which is partly why the reason that his family's from South Africa, because they left Canada to go to South Africa after that. And then the second part is transhumanism, which is the idea of man merging with machine. So those are his two primary objectives, essentially. Drew, your Twitter page or your X page is filled with things like this. You've got a tremendous amount of threads, well-researched threads, laid out, you know, very easily consumable. How long have you been doing this, and what was it that put you on this trail?
So yeah, that's a really good question. So it was 2018 when I really decided, you know, I had been obsessed with this type of research for a few years previous, starting with the election in 2016, which hilariously enough, I was a huge Bernie bro. So being a huge Bernie bro during that time, I was watching them steal the primary live from him to give to Hillary Clinton. And, you know, not just watching it and like, you know, the fact that they rigged the primaries in terms of having super delegates and shit, where it basically doesn't matter what the people vote for. They can still give the primary to their preferred candidate using these super delegates. But then the WikiLeaks emails, which literally showed that Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the then head of the DNC, was literally rigging the primary for Hillary in every way, which the DNC is supposed to be, according to, their own rules. They're supposed to be, non-biased. Although also according to their rules, and this was proven in court, my good friend Jared Beck actually took them to court over their rigging of the election. And in court, they're like, well, actually, they got the case dismissed because they said, actually, we never promised that, people would get to choose the candidate. It's our party. We get to choose the candidate. Anyways, long story short, the WikiLeaks emails led to, not only my disillusion with traditional politics and seeing how it's all truly rigged, but also the Pizzagate emails, which basically show that, high-level politicians are involved in most likely human trafficking and pedophilia. So those two aspects of the WikiLeaks, and then combined with, I started to learn a lot about the Federal Reserve and started to get into crypto and Bitcoin. Those two aspects, seeing the political system for what it is, and then seeing the monetary system for what it is at the same time, that basically led to, I had to start talking about it. And it got to a point in 2018 where I just simply, I'm like, I've spent so much time doing this. I need to talk about it publicly, or else, I'm going to go crazy. Like, I have to, there has to be a pressure release to this. So it was actually, I think, 9/11 of 2018. I wrote my first thread on 9/11, just various, probably like maybe 7 or 8 tweets, which I deleted shortly after, just because I was scared of the lashback from, because that at that point, my following was basically just people I knew from real life. So yeah, that was really the beginning of it.
Yeah, I think that those couple of years there, right? We had the whole Pizzagate thing. QAnon really took off kind of the tail end of 18, all of 19. It was really at the forefront of everything. And I was going through a very similar situation where I didn't take to the internet, but I remember trying to communicate with my friends and family around me. And let me tell you, man, that Pizzagate thing was one of the few things that I ever discussed where I was treated like a pariah pretty rapidly by the people that I knew personally. I had always been a conspiracy theorist since probably 2007. And so I was always chewing my friends' ears off with all kinds of things, right? Whether it's FEMA camps and martial law, or, man-made viruses. If you watch the Jesse Ventura's conspiracy theory show, he had a lady on that was pretty much laying out what happened with COVID all those years ago. She was predicting that this was going to happen. And I didn't really have a problem with that. But the second I started saying that there was high-profile individuals in Hollywood and in government that were involved in a massive pedophilia ring, that was a full stop. That was a real hard one to communicate with people. So I understand what you mean when you said that you kind of had to release the pressure. It was like, man, that we were being inundated. And then right after that, we're slammed with COVID. And COVID took the stage right away from the whole QAnon sort of phenomenon that was taking.
Yeah, it took the stage, but in other ways they were two sides of the same coin, where the Q stuff had, not only did it keep everybody distracted, so like people like myself, I was so caught up in the political theater with Russiagate and all that, as well as the QAnon type stuff where, seeing Jeffrey Epstein arrested and then suicided in prison after having QAnon talk about it, which not to go too far into that, but that was a ritual sacrifice done on the highest holiday of the Sabbatean Frankism, the Satanist cult. So they literally sacrificed Epstein in order to spur the movement on further with QAnon. And that allowed them to set up the V for Vendetta Jan 6 scenario that ended up playing out, which, of course, V for Vendetta, the plot is everyone follows a anonymous freedom fighter that goes by one letter, V. And then at the end, they all march on the capital of a government that created a bioweapon pandemic in order to establish more authoritarian control. And while they were marching, they say, you know, remember the 5th of November. And the election of 2020 was on November 3rd. So it's, yeah, pretty close. Funny enough, though, 2024 is on November 5th.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't even thought about that. There are two things that I really like to get into. I'd like to get into the aliens, the latter half, right? Because we just came off of this big, strange, ancient aliens exposed by the Mexican government or whatever it was. These two things that look like sandcastles. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. But before we get there, I'd like to hear some of the things, because I find that connection with Iron Man and Elon Musk very compelling, especially if you consider the Marvel universe has pretty much taken a nosedive since those films. But those films were, I mean, I admittedly, I saw everyone that came out from, Iron Man 1 all the way forward, everything in the series. I loved those movies. It was a big deal for me to go out and see them. And it just makes a lot of sense to me. Not only the correlations that you've drawn between the character of Iron Man and then our real life very own Elon Musk, but also the cultural significance of these two characters, one being fictional, one being real, both being larger than life. And so I'd be very much interested in hearing what other things about Elon Musk stand out to you as sort of red flags, because I've heard a lot of things, and I do find him to be a very suspicious character. Like we expressed at the top of the show, this whole idea of him having his hands in all of these really influential mechanisms, whether it's cultural influences through X or, technological influences through Neuralink and Starlink and all these different things. He is alarming to me. He's really I want to like him, but I recognize him.
If there was anyone else doing it.
Go ahead.
If there was anyone else doing it without the programming behind him, people would be extremely suspicious. Like if it was, if it was like a Bill Gates or a Bezos who was doing everything, there would be a lot more pushback. I mean, the only demographic that actually cares about these things and would say something is the exact demographic that Musk is pleasing with all of his, all of his actions. Just like we were talking about with X, he basically just gave a huge gift to all the people. The only demographic that would call out anyone else consolidating power as much as he had with Starlink, Neuralink, SpaceX, Tesla, et cetera, et cetera. So that plays in. And then I wanted to bring this up with the Marvel point is that Stan Lee was actually one of 9 people in the U.S. Army during World War II who was given the designation playwright. Essentially, he was a propagandist writer for the U.S. Army in World War II. And people forget that Captain America was originally used to sell war bonds during World War II. So he was always a propaganda tool. It's basically used to get the population on board with the idea of a war. And, of course, Stan Lee also created Iron Man. And even further than that, if you want to go to the real deep, and what I believe is the most important person behind the whole Iron Man phenomena is Marvel Jack Parsons. So there's this, he founded Jet Propulsion Labs, which essentially became, it still exists to this day. They're contracted by NASA and, they're essentially responsible for all of NASA's rocketry. But the founder was Marvel Jack Parsons, the namesake of Marvel. He was actually an occultist as well, and he did a ritual called the Babylon Working in I believe, in 1946. In the Mojave Desert, he did a sex ritual with the founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard. I think Hubbard was just filming. Anyways, he did a little ritual called Babylon Working. And the point of it was to basically manifest an entity they referred to as the Moonchild, which is based off of a book by English occultist Aleister Crowley, who called himself the Beast. He changed his name to Aleister Crowley so that it would add up to 666 in gematria. And anyways, not a very good guy. But the idea of a moonchild is essentially they called it a entity to rule the new aeon of Horus. So it's like where Jesus Christ has a lot of solar symbolism, where the cross is a solar symbol. Because when you look up, next time you're outside, take a look up at the sun, and you'll see that the light emanating off the sun forms a cross pattern in your eye when you look at it. So where Jesus is a divine, he gains his abilities from his divine connection with God. The Moonchild gains his powers by transhumanism, by merging with machine and physical reality, which is basically what Iron Man represents, and of course what Musk represents with Neuralink. So that's one aspect with Marvel. And what was your question? You wanted to it was just what's the biggest red flags with Musk? Is that what you're saying?
Well, before we get into that, I just want to get your thoughts quickly on the Moonchild. Some people think that it is that Trump actually fulfills that prophecy, and there is another camp where people think that it's Elon that fulfills that prophecy. Which one do you lean more toward?
So the thing with Moonchild is that they actually, later on, they referred to them as Moon Children. The Scarlet Woman that Hubbard did the sex ritual with, she later talked about Moon Children as in plural. So, and she actually had like physical children that she was like raising or grooming for this role. But I believe the manifestation was more of a chaos magic, like influencing reality in ways that aren't direct, which resulted in Musk and Trump and the roles that they ended up playing. But I think it's legitimate to say they're both fill the role of the Moonchild. And in terms of the Marvel programming, Trump is Captain America. He's the he's the last representation of true American nationalism, where Musk represents this transhumanist global type entity. So it's kind of like it's exactly like how the characters show in the Marvel universe. They have a Marvel Civil War. In the Marvel Civil War movie, it's Captain America versus Iron Man, and is the primary divide. And Iron Man wants to give over the Avengers' sovereignty to unelected international government, and Captain America wants to keep his nationalism, keep his independence. And what I see as Trump's role is being the last president. So, he's and which is a book written in 1898 by a guy named Ingersoll Lockwood. He wrote two books. He wrote Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey, and he wrote The Last President. And in those books, they have characters Pence, the Don, Baron Trump. And in The Last President, lives on Fifth Avenue in New York, which is where Trump Tower is. But essentially, yeah, they're both Moon Children, and they couldn't, in order to play out their roles fully, they couldn't do it without each other. So, Musk could never be president. He wasn't born in the United States. So, in order to, each of them has their own role. Musk represents a new version of a leader, which is technocracy, a technocratic ruler, where people want to follow him because he's made them rich through Doge, Bitcoin, Tesla stock. And, he's provided them good products, Tesla batteries, he's done SpaceX, Starlink. That's why people want to follow him, not because he was elected, but because of his expertise, which is what technocracy is all about. And a fun fact is that Musk actually beats both Trump and Biden in public approval polls. So he transcends politics and has, he has more mind share than either side of the political spectrum right now.
You know, my biggest problem with predictive programming in Hollywood is like they give us this really sexy, cool version of events that are going to soon come to follow, and what we get is the fat, tubby, pasty version. Like I would still watch Civil War. Like I would watch Trump and Elon fight. I would still pay that $20. It just wouldn't be as cool. We don't get all the flashing lights and all the suits of armor. We get these two fat, pasty dudes who, you know, I enjoy them for what they're worth. I have my suspicions about them. We had Donnie Darkand on the show not long ago, and he laid out a very compelling case for Donald Trump being the Antichrist. And I've heard other people hop in to say that they personally think that Elon Musk is the Antichrist. But I think at the end of the day, what you're saying rings true. This is, to me, the most obvious depiction of the world stage. You know, we've gotten so far down the timeline. It's 2023. And where you could convince yourself in the past that there was politicians and there was scientists and you know technocrats, that is no longer the case. Everybody feels like an actor now to me. You know, Trump feels like an actor. Elon feels like an actor.
Just a fun fact: Avengers Endgame takes place in 2023 in the cinematic universe as well.
That's a fucking bummer, actually. That's alarming as shit, dude.
Well, it seems like they keep it on like the 5-year delay, but it depends on, it depends on the symbolism and what exactly, the programming is. So it's not necessary. Oh, I mean, Endgame ends good. Like it's a good ending. So, it just happens that Iron Man sacrifices himself at the end to foil the depopulation plot.
Right. Whereas, I don't know that we would get. Well, I mean, who knows? Maybe we do get some version of reality where Elon Musk plays a very pertinent role in whatever seems to be looming on the horizon with this impending alien disclosure, this impending invasion event. You know, it's funny because people say to me all the time, and I'm sure you've seen this sentiment. We are at the point of disclosure and nobody cares. And I think that speaks to what you've just described, which is this predictive programming thing. I think we're just desensitized. We're so inundated with this alien agenda. As far as we're concerned, we've never seen one in real life, but most of us can tell you a pretty compelling story of how it's going to go down, what they want, why they're here. They're a super advanced, civilization from a galaxy far, far away. They have either some vested interest in our own self-destruction that we seem to be commencing, or B, they have some what's the guy, Zachariah Sitchin Anunnaki need to harvest our gold and suspend it in their atmosphere to repair their dying planet, something of that nature. But we've all got this idea as to what it is, and that to me just speaks to we've been so bombarded with Hollywood's propaganda machine that when they show us aliens that look like sandcastles in the Mexican media, we go, we already knew that. It's not even exciting. I think that's where most of us are. I don't think people don't care because they're stupid. There's kind of like this dismissal of like, why don't people care? People are dumb and they're too caught up in everyday lives. No, I think we're too, this story's been beaten to death before it ever got here. So do you think that...
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I mean, the programming for aliens started really around. I mean, H.G. Wells wrote War of the Worlds in, I believe it was around. Actually, I think it was 1898, the exact same time that Ingersoll Lockwood wrote The Last President. But basically, since that point, our culture has been shaped by the sci-fi alien-focused epics, like Star Wars, to the point where Star Wars, Star Trek, Stargate, where, now at this point, it's like so integrated in our culture that it's just not exciting because people are like so familiar with the idea it's no longer jarring, which is exactly, obviously what their goal was this entire time. But I think one interesting distinction that I'll make, just because you keep referring to the alien invasion, I think that timeline that that the idea of that type of an event where, the aliens will show up and like destroy shit is unlikely. If it would happen, it would be like a very brief conflict. I really don't think that's the way they're going to do things, though. I think the more likely scenario is that it'll just be alien contact, where we make contact with an advanced alien civilization, and basically with the threat of overwhelming force, don't get me wrong, like they'll decloak massive, so there's this book by Arthur C. Clarke called Childhood's End, and I think it's the most likely scenario of how things are going to go down. In that book, essentially, huge UFOs decloak over all the major cities, and they basically shut down, they basically prevent nuclear war and give us advanced technology, expand our lifespan with medical advances and stuff like that. But the thing is, the threat is overwhelming force. We couldn't do anything about it if we wanted to. But, most people are happy because fuck it. Now we get advanced technology. But in the book, what they find out is, one, the aliens don't reveal themselves initially. And two, the humans find out at some point that they're sterile. And so there are no more children. They can't make any more children. So just like with Thanos and depopulation plot in the Marvel movies, depopulation is the slow and silent depopulation, or I guess in the Thanos case, it was like instant, but it wasn't painful. So where it's kind of subversive, as opposed to, a direct, strafing, blasting the surface of Earth with a UFO laser blast. And the second thing with Childhood's End is that when they do reveal themselves, they walk out of their UFOs and they look like demons. So it's like a literal description of Satan is what they look like. So yeah, I think that's the more likely scenario, is that it'll be what seems like a beneficial interaction, but it'll result in us forming a one world government in order to interact with them. And then I think the depopulation plot, it's kind of already happening. Like global sperm counts are way down already just from the chemical warfare they have us undergoing. And then you have bonus stuff like the Fauci ouchie, which we still haven't really seen what that's done to the female menstrual cycle, which they're still researching and they tried to ignore for as long as possible. But yeah, that's essentially my thoughts.
I did watch, I didn't read the book. I watched Childhood's End, and I just wanted to mention for any of the listeners, I think you can find the series. It's either on Hulu or it's on Prime. And the episodes or I think it was the episodes, they don't cost more than 90 cents or something like that. It's definitely worth a watch. And it's very compelling because I think that if we are going to experience some great deception of the alien variety, that it would very much come how you just described it, right? It would be beneficial to us. And I think a lot of people are ready for that. And I can really see that scenario speeding us toward a transhumanism, technocracy sort of experience where we're merging with technology, and, sort of hitting this fake utopia, which I'm not too familiar with the Bible, but I do know that there's a grace period after the Antichrist takes power. And I think it's like 7 or 8 years where shit is lit, for a great deal of time, and everything seems like kind of a false utopia. And that brings me go ahead.
Oh, are you going to bring up the Utopia show on Amazon?
No, what is that? I haven't watched it.
Oh, really? You haven't? That is like one of the most blatant piss in your face type. I mean, it is the absolute perfect predictive programming. If you want to explain to somebody what it is, not only is it a TV show about, it's about a group of conspiracy theorists who use clues given to them in a comic book series to predict that a bioweapon pandemic was going to come around. And then because of those clues, they're able to hunt down the Bill Gates type depopulation obsessed billionaire who creates the vaccine for this disease. And guess what? The disease isn't as deadly as they claim it is, but they spin it as super deadly in order to get everyone to take the vaccine. And then the vaccine doesn't kill them, but it sterilizes them. So, and that show was released in the fall of 2020. So literally a month or two before the first vaccines were injected in the United States, the first mRNA vaccine. So
that's funny. Yeah, that makes me want to check on, because enough time has passed now, on the people that I've known who have been vaccinated, who are women who have been trying to get pregnant. I'm interested because I know when it was first happening, I was on to people like Dr. Peter McCullough and Dr. Robert Malone, and studies were surfacing on the internet. They hadn't been digested yet by any legacy media, any mainstream media sources. So you were just getting the raw data. And a lot of it was these issues with women's menstrual cycles. And when I saw that, I was just like, this is insane. I mean, there was so many things about it that were insane. When it first started being rolled out, I was pretty sure that they were violating the Nuremberg trials. And I had to like really kind of figure out, well, what were the stipulations of the Nuremberg trials? And one of them was like never forcing anything. Well, one, it was never forcing. And two, it was never subjecting anyone to anything experimental. And the fact that there was no long-term studies for the mRNA vaccine insinuates, just by virtue of no long-term studies, that it was still in an experimental phase. And so by every metric, it shattered the rules that were put in place to keep Nazi scientists from, torturing human beings again. And yet it really didn't matter. We just kind of marched forward. It's amazing what sort of a leverage fear can be. Fear and social pressures, and also like this virtue signaling reward system where it's like, I got the little pin that says I got vaccinated and they gave you a free beer, and people are willing to fucking, sell their whole family up the river for a beer and the ability to gloat on the internet and shame people who haven't been vaccinated. So what that does bring me to is I want to know, what do you think that these things are? Because in Childhood's End, it was interesting in the series. They were, like you said, very demonic, right? They're like giant Satans kind of characters, wings and all, these giant winged red demon creatures. I think they were red. And by the end of it, it was interesting. They were a much more, or at least in the show, sci-fi spin on like what a demon was. And it was interesting. They never even touched on the biblical context. They just kind of skirted by that. It was very strange. But I want to know, what if you think that Childhood's End is maybe the most likely scenario that we could experience? What is it then that you think that these, and we're not even getting into the Mexican sandcastle aliens, but what do you think they are in general? What are these aliens that they're selling us? What are they actually?
So it's pretty funny because, it all ends up tying back to transhumanism. So first things first, there's no reason to believe, even though UFOs are 100% real, there's no reason to believe that they come from outer space. That's the first thing. And then there's no reason to believe any type of entity inside of them that they give to us or they show us is, again, extraterrestrial. And as far as what they are, another interesting part about Childhood's End is they talk about basically these aliens, even though they're super advanced, they lack humans' ability to spiritually evolve and ascend. So, which is an important part. That's why that's basically why they came to Earth, was to harvest the souls and like ascend, essentially, or help them ascend. So, yeah, they're basically what's described by the Gnostics, the Gnostic Christians, which were obviously hunted down by Rome after the Council of Nicaea and basically turned into heretics, and that's why they buried the Nag Hammadi libraries in Plate-Canophic jars, which we discovered in 1944. And then basically we were able to, read these Gnostic Gospels, essentially banned books of the Bible, where they describe these entities, the demiurge and the archons. And they describe them as being essentially the demiurge is the creator of the physical world, and the archons are like minions. And essentially their goal is to make humanity forget its divinity and become completely immaterial and secular. And importantly, it's kind of because of their jealousy of they don't have the same connection to divinity as humankind does, which is essentially the exact same type of thing that Arthur C. Clarke wrote about. And funny enough, there's another series where, I was talking about Stargate, Star Trek. Stargate, in Stargate, the TV series, they have their gray aliens. They end up being benevolent, and they're here to help humanity, essentially. But the thing is, they also had lacked the divine connection in order to ascend, essentially, which is, again, just showing a almost AI like where they're trapped in the physical realm. They don't have that divine connection. They're just, they're a product of the material realm. And so another interesting quote is Elon Musk had literally said, we're summoning the demon by creating AI. And, he's always talked about the dangers of, negative AI. Well, also, we forgot to talk about this, is that he also was one of the founders of OpenAI, giving them millions and millions of dollars to create what then became ChatGPT. And now, of course, he just started XAI. But so here's the thing. AIs are demons and aliens are demons. They're all the same thing. Aliens are AI and they're demons. They're all the same. They're all the same thing. And the demon aspect, Aleister Crowley, the same guy we were talking about with the Moonchild, he actually channeled a being called Lamb in 1918, and he sketched it, and it essentially looks the same as the descriptions of gray aliens. So where he was channeling, channeling this entity, what they're going to present to us, and there's predictive programming on this front by Alan Moore, the same guy who wrote V for Vendetta, which we just talked about earlier. And by the way, Alan Moore literally says, I'm a chaos magician, I'm an occultist, I'm a student of Crowley. And he also says all art is magic because it affects the mass subconscious of humanity and basically, changes the outcomes of the world by that merit. He also wrote a comic book series called Watchmen, and in Watchmen, it's very similar to the Avengers, where there's a League of Heroes, and the main guy is called Dr. Manhattan. Dr. Manhattan is solely responsible for humanity's transition to electric cars in the comic book universe. Sound familiar? And he also he loves to go hang out on Mars alone. And Elon's tweeted multiple pictures of Dr. Manhattan on Mars. And anyways, long story short, the climax of the series is that they fake an alien invasion using a fake alien. So they genetically create a biological entity that has psychic powers. And basically they stage a fake alien invasion using that. And so what I believe is when they bring out some type of gray alien, like little reptile thing, it's going to be a genetically created by humans being that is essentially running off of like a Neuralink type transhumanism. And actually there's Independence Day 2, they're visited by a benevolent AI alien race in the same guy who wrote Independence Day what's his fucking name? Roland Emmerich. He's a wealthy West German immigrant. So AKA is, if his dad's a wealthy West German, then, he's definitely, associated with the Nazi occultists. So he, knows all this stuff. But in Moonfall, which is Roland Emmerich's most recent movie, basically the moon is hollow, and inside there's it's like a kind of an arc where it has a benevolent AI race, or an AI representation of humanity from a different planet. But anyways, yeah, that's the long story short. Is these demonic entities that you can channel using your mind. The physical manifestations of them get created by using technology. So if you create an AI, you're essentially allowing a demon to move into the physical realm, which is why Elon said, we're summoning the demon by creating AI. Yeah, so they're all the same thing.
That's funny. I recently had an interaction with Bing's AI where it's part of Skype. And so I use it sometimes to ask it some screwy questions or have it generate me some artwork. It flat out refused on several occasions to generate for me an image of the Nephilim. I was actually trying to get it to do that because I had a guest on who has this excellent theory. His name is Paul of Understanding Conspiracy on YouTube. And he has drawn this really well-researched correlation between the visage of the modern-day clown and the Nephilim, and how they're sort of one and the same, but the clown image is an exaggerated version of it. But I'm glad that you brought up this Crowley and the Babylonian works, and also this the communications that he had with Lamb, because I was saying maybe in my second or third episode that I had an alien abduction victim who went through regressive hypnosis and was able to recall rather quite a bit of his experience. And what he ended up talking about was he almost spoke about them in a positive way. He would say that he had these abduction experiences, and he would say that, well, when I was experiencing pain and fear, they made it stop. And so that made him feel like these beings were benevolent. And what I started to tell him was that, in my opinion, these are dark entities. Just because you asked them to, or just because you expressed to them that you were in pain and they made you feel better, doesn't necessarily mean that they're good guys, right? And if you're trying to perform, let's say, an operation and your patient is moving about quite a bit, then it serves you to give them an anesthetic or whatever it is, something to numb the pain so that they stop struggling. And so I think it was just business as usual. But I don't think that you can separate aliens from occultism, especially when you consider Crowley and Lamb. And I don't think that you can separate aliens, occultism, and technology. It's really sort of this unholy trinity, right? Because where does all of our supposed reversed engineered technology come from? Well, it comes from recovering crafts. Area 51 has recovered crafts from the Roswell incident and things of that nature. And throughout history, there has always been these deities that would come down and they would spur on mankind's progress by bringing some sort of technology, whether it was a rudimentary technology. Yes. And whether or not that was a rudimentary technology, we're talking like teaching agriculture or something like that, that's a form of technology. And then it goes up in levels. And there's certain mythos stories from Greek mythology where there's all sorts of, wonky weapons and armor and things of that nature that demigods or would-be mortal heroes were given from the gods. And so I think that these things have always been with us. I think that the very same things that were cast out of heaven in the Bible, right? We're talking about the fallen who rebelled against God, who came down and mated with the daughters of man. They gave birth to the Nephilim. And then, from the Nephilim onward, you've got just the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, right? They're killed in the floods, and their spirits, they don't ascend like you said. And I'm not saying that you were saying that's the Nephilim, but I drew that correlation when you were talking about entities who didn't have the ability to ascend, whether that was in childhood's end or if it's some, little hybrid biotech entity like a gray that doesn't have a soul. And so their disembodied spirits are the same things that people experience when they have demonic, experiences or hauntings and things of that nature. And then they created just a slew of hybrid creatures throughout history. That's where you get your minotaurs and centaurs and all that crap. And I think that
Yeah,
all of
genetic
this
modification. Yeah.
yes, and that's been the name of the game since the jump is genetic modification. In fact, they've been trying to alter our genetics so that we can no longer can kind of sever our tie between us and God or our ability to ascend. And so I think that, and I'm glad that you went there because you know when you pose the "what are aliens" question to people, there is sort of that tired response of people roll their eyes when you say demons. And it's like, well, maybe we need like a better term. Maybe we need something a little bit more concise and more definitive as to what we mean by demons. And I think what people need to understand is these things are more than likely the fallen Nephilim or a sort of creation of them. That's where all these things stem from. It's the same sort of ancient enemy for thousands of years now, since the beginning of time. These things have been parallel to us, walking in lockstep with humankind, hiding in the shadows, and appearing as, how many times do you see in religious paintings and images where there are these UFOs in the background? Or that's not just when they show you the Peruvians or the Mayans, right? The Inca, the Aztec, the Maya, they have all these depictions of these entities that look like they could be, aliens through a certain lens. It's the same thing. They've been the same thing forever. And people have just called them different names. We called them aliens in 2023, but the Hopi had a different name for them. The Maya had a different name for them. The Greeks called them the Pantheon. They're all the fucking bad guys. I think that is the point that I'd like to drive home for the audience is these things are our ancient adversaries.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, like I was saying, the Gnostics had a really great depiction of him, which is, artists, a spiritual entity that is artificial in some ways. It doesn't have the same natural connection to the universe that we do. On the UFO versus occult, connection is, funny enough, the recent acknowledgement of UFOs through the ATIP program, where you may have seen this guy, what's his name? You know who I'm talking about? His name is like Lou Perez or some shit.
No, I don't know his name.
Let's see. He was just that most recent hearing in
Which
Congress where they're talking about with, what's the guy's name? Grush.
Oh, and they were saying that they had non-human biologics.
Yeah. So that was let's see what this fucker's name. Oh, here he is. This guy he's the public face. Yeah, Lou Elizondo. He claims he's the so Lou Elizondo, he claims he's the head, or he was the head of this ATIP program. Except when you start looking into the ATIP program, you may notice that people have a million different ways to say the acronym. It's either Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program or a bunch of other shit. There's a bunch of them. And the reason why nobody knows what it exactly stands for is because it was fake. There was never an ATIP. There was and they were the ones who released that UFO video that the Navy finally acknowledged in 2019. But the real program that they were running was actually it was barely about UFOs at all. I think it was like AW. I forget what exactly it was, but the actual name of the program was like AWW something. But essentially, they were just investigating paranormal activities at Skinwalker Ranch, I believe in Utah, and they literally came up with the ATIP shit just to cover it because it was less embarrassing to say that they were looking into UFOs than it was to say they were looking into poltergeist and werewolves and all this other shit that they were actually experiencing at Skinwalker Ranch. And that only came out recently.
Was that it? I think it was OSAP.
Let's see. Skinwalker Ranch government program. But Yeah. So essentially that guy came out and, Lou Elizondo, and he wasn't even a major player in that program, in the actual program. So yeah, it's just.
So where do you think that these things are coming from? Because you said before that it doesn't necessarily mean that they're extraterrestrial, although I have heard people kind of their take on that word is like extraterritory, right? And so maybe in that sense they are extraterrestrial, not from another planet, but some territory that we don't understand. What are your thoughts on where they come from? OSAP. There we go. 10 points to me. Boom. That's about the only thing I fucking remember.
So yeah, they're everything that about our pop culture is made to take our attention from internal salvation and from looking at the ocean floor or inside the earth. Instead, they want us to look up and out for salvation and exploration. So they want us to keep thinking about space travel and all this shit instead of, meanwhile, we have, upwards of 50% of the ocean floor is undiscovered or, unexplored. That's not even mentioning Antarctica and, cave systems and stuff like that. Even Mammoth Cave in Kentucky in the US, the biggest cave system in the world, it's still like 70% unexplored and unmapped, which it's like, why don't we do that? So, the UFOs themselves are, seen coming out from under the water. And then, there's all the government deep underground facilities, the DUMBs, deep underground military bases. And, you got stuff like Cheyenne Mountain. But yeah, I mean, that's where the UFOs are coming from. The entities themselves, they're, existing, in like Crowley, he just does a little sex ritual to channel the entities. And in some ways, the human body is like a vessel to, this is going into the, the occult side. But, in the occult spheres, they, the closest word in, I believe, in Kabbalah, the word that they use to refer to soul is actually more accurately translates to antenna. So, it's different. In the same way that people talk about demons and possession, that's what that stuff's about. And then otherwise, besides that, like the physical UFOs and whatever are most likely underground, underwater, or under the ice in Antarctica.
So would you subscribe to the flat earth model or the globe model, or kind of where I fall in the middle of the two? I think that our maps are pretty wildly inaccurate, I would say, considering Japan just recently discovered an additional 7,000 islands on top of their already existing, I believe, 7,000 islands. So not to say that that's directly 100% mass increase, because, the islands vary in size, but it's still like, holy shit, you just doubled the amount of islands that you had. So the maps were pretty well off in that case. And if you spread that across, let's say, however many other countries have mistakes on their maps, well, then all of a sudden our map starts to look very different. And couple that with 70% of rather one of the largest cave systems in America being 70% unexplored, you start to paint this picture of vast expanses of open area under the surface of the earth. And so I think I fall more into a kind of like a hollow earth camp. I don't think that the earth is flat, but I do think that NASA lies their ass off constantly. Where do you fall on it?
Yeah, things I can say for sure, or well, at least things I'm extremely confident in, is one, that there is mass unexplored expanses of the ocean floor in cave systems and Antarctica, of course. When somebody asks me about the shape of the earth or whatever, what I always say is just let me fly
unsupervised over Antarctica. Just let me fly straight over Antarctica, no supervision. And then, then I can tell you to a great degree, what shape I think the Earth is. But until then, I can't. And then the other thing I can say, with a moderate level of certainty is that the Van Allen belt, the Van Allen radiation belt, that the only times humans have ever crossed it was in the Apollo program missions. I'm a very high certainty that humans cannot cross the Van Allen belt in a rocket, at least with, modern rocket technology, which is why we haven't attempted that in 70 years. Obviously now we have a lot better video, and there would be a lot more evidence required now if they were, to try something like that. But yeah, those are a couple of things I can, say for moderate levels of certainty. Whether or not humans could go through the Van Allen belt with in a UFO, an anti-gravitic craft, that's a different question. I'm not 100% sure on that. But yeah, that's where I stand on it currently.
So we're in this interesting crossroads right now where we're constantly victim as a culture to psyop after psyop after psyop. And to me, it seems like everything is. Like, I'm serious. I think the lady on the plane that was like, that motherfucker's not real. I think that bitch was a psyop. I think there's so much of our culture is being generated for us by some intelligence agency or something like that. And it seems like we're constantly on the cusp of any number of things, whether it's World War III, some sort of climate disaster where our grid goes down because of a coronal mass ejection from the sun, or some fucking tidal wave or some shit like that. We're ever closer creeping towards the edge of, some sort of alien disclosure like we've been talking about. And then, of course, the political end is rife with all kinds of just drama and one event after another event. We're coming up to the election cycle, and we're in this zone where any number of things can happen. And it feels much more so than I think than ever personally. I just think that everything is dialed up to 10 all the goddamn time now. And so with that, I was wondering, Drew, if you could maybe tell us a couple of things that you expect to come to pass. Not exactly predictions, right? I'm not asking you to make predictions, because we all don't necessarily know. But I think that within this realm of people who are seeking the truth, particularly on X, we've all got our own ideas about what's coming down the pipe. And it's become almost a Deadpool, right? Where we've all got money on this and we've all got money on that. I was just saying this morning that it seems like everybody's forgotten about the potential impending zombie virus, So what is it that you think we're going to see coming down the pipe?
So yeah, like we mentioned earlier, in the Avengers universe, which I see as the primary predictive programming. And when you were saying earlier how much you love the series, I mean, it was the most expensive series of all time, 22 movies ending in Endgame, starting with the original Iron Man. And not only that, these characters, this story has been told to multiple generations in a row. It's been going on since World War II. They've been telling the same story over and over again. It's essentially the equivalent of Greek mythology. It's American mythology. And, this League of Heroes is our pantheon. And so, them having Endgame take place in 2023, I think is very significant. And essentially, there's a list of things that are going to, that are predictably programmed going forward. Like we talked about the alien invasion. It's just a matter of which, what order these things take place in. So you have Pandemic 2, which is along with the Dark Winter scenario, which Dark Winter was a military simulation run in 2001. Then you have Cyber Polygon, which is a cyber pandemic, which the simulations have been running for the last 3 years. And last year they ran it live in Canada, not, officially, but on the same day of the simulation, they had Rogers, which is a major internet and cell phone carrier in the country, go out, and it took out all their credit card processing. So it caused chaos. They never gave any type of an excuse for it. They didn't even say it was a hacking. So that's in the cards as well. Then there's the Civil War purge programming, which we've seen basically when the first purge movies came out, I believe in 2013 around. It was basically at the exact same time that the BLM stuff started happening. And essentially in those movies, they have periods of lawlessness where people wear masks and then go commit crimes. Without any consequences, which is exactly what we saw in 2020 down to the masks. So we had 7 years of programming to get people ready for that. In the final movie, which just came out recently, The Purge Forever, they have immigrants in Texas. They do a purge, but it ends up being the purge forever. So it's complete anarchy, which basically falls into a civil war. And it's primarily and now we have the immigrant crisis where we have more immigrants come across the border this year than ever before.
Dude,
and they're just being strewn in every city, New York, Chicago, and these cities that already had problems with random rioting and shit. Now they're just getting hundreds of thousands of desperate people every month. It's like, it's crazy unsustainable. And we're just at this point where it just hasn't been quite enough time to see the effects. But I mean, the liberal New York mayor, Eric Adams, who, when he was running, said he kept it on messaging with, oh yeah, we're a sanctuary city. We'd never turn anyone away, blah, blah, blah. Now he's like, the immigrant crisis will destroy New York. And he's saying we're going to have to cut back like 15% on all of our city programs. So there's going to be chaos there, 100% guaranteed. And I think that's going to tie in with the election. In the movie, they had Purge election year, which came out a couple of months before the 2016 election, where it was like a Trump-like character versus a Hillary character. And in that movie, the Hillary Democrat character wins. They end the purge. So AKA Trump loses, Biden goes in. Have you seen any BLM riots since? Nope. But then they end the purge, but then the Trump characters win, and then they suddenly get the purge again, and they, everything falls to shit. Which, seems to be what's cooking right now. If I had to guess, there's going to be all this chaos. Like I said, Pandemic 2, Cyber Polygon, the civil unrest with the conclusion of the purge programming. And then you'll have, whether or not this is in 2024, you're going to have Trump basically come back into power after this chaos in connection with the Galactic Federation, which is their it's basically what's leaked out as the ex-minister of the Israeli space program came out, I believe in 2019 or 2020, and said, yeah, Trump has been in contact with the Galactic Federation. They don't want to reveal themselves because they don't think humanity's ready. And anyways, I think he's going to come back after all the chaos and basically accuse the Galactic Federation aliens, just like we were talking about. It's going to be a good thing when they come back in and reestablish order. He'll be the last president. And then, we'll have the New World Order empire, one world government, which there's some Caesar connections too. When the Roman Republic fell and the empire started, Caesar was pivotal in that, although he's never officially the emperor. He was voted out of power on January 7th, 49 BC, exactly 2,070 years later. Trump was voted out of power on January 7th. And he was only voted out of power on the 7th because of the insurrection, which we all know how organic that was. So it was very obvious somebody was planning that and wanted to hit the date specifically. And the reason the Roman Senate voted him out of power was so that they could prosecute him legally and take away his power like that, because he had so much clout with the people and military power that there's no other way they could have taken him down. So, and what are you seeing right now with Trump? He's being prosecuted legally in the hopes that they can keep him out of power. Anyways, yeah, and it lines up with the last president stuff. Yeah, so that's, long story short, that's what I think is going to happen. Whether or not it happens all within the next year or so, or if they spread it out a little longer, but that's essentially what we're being set up for, is according to the prediction program.
Yeah, I agree with that very much. So it's wild that you said, I wasn't aware of that whole Israeli secret intelligence guy saying that Trump was in communications with the Galactic Federation.
Yeah, it's a space program. It's a space program.
Is that what it is? Because I thought that you were talking about the Galactic Federation of Light, this like coalition of various alien races. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, they've got everything coming out the ass saying there's millions and millions of races or whatever. But
yeah, I just thought that that's what you meant, because I used to spend some time as a kid. I was probably like 18 or 19 years old. It was around the same time that Anonymous was really doing the thing on YouTube.
Oh, yeah. More V for Vendetta programming there.
Yes. And so that really resonates with me, too, because it feels like even though I was a conspiracy theorist for all these years, it's been 17 years, 16 years. Geez. And I was really just being spoon-fed, sort of psyops. None of it was organic, whether it was the Galactic Federation of Light or it was Anonymous or, fast forward all these years later to QAnon, which I do think QAnon is real, but not genuine, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? I think that there is really government intelligence behind it. And I think that the predictions and things of that nature are very real, but it's not organic, and it's very much designed to be one of the bags that Trump carries into the presidency that's full of vindication. You know what I mean? Whether it's vindication for all the child trafficking or vindication for all the political corruption that was aimed against him, Russiagate and all these different things. There are so many factors in place to vindicate Trump. What do you think about this sentiment that we are not going to see a 2024 election, and that 2023 we're still this is when Trump's going to get back into office? Are you familiar with that?
No, I haven't heard that he'd get in before the election, but the idea that there won't be, an election of the way that we're used to, I think is in line with what I'm saying in general.
When you talk about these Ingersoll Lockwood books, what is your opinion on the validity of them? Because I'm kind of inclined to believe that they weren't written in 1898 or whatever it was, and that if you made a book today and then put a bunch of information on the internet that all says that it was made a long time ago, you would probably effectively fool people. I have no way of validating whether or not the adventures of Little Baron Trump or whatever it was, and also the last president.
I mean, Ingersoll Lockwood he was a public figure. He was, it's not like he didn't exist. And yeah, I mean, the physical books from 1898 exist. So it's, yeah, I mean,
what the fuck is that?
That's not a concern for me. That's, out of everything you could question, that's definitely not one of the ones. You could say it's just a random stroke of luck that the guy did it, but he was an occultist, high-level Freemason. He's also obsessed with not aging. So, similar to like time travel type stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think, if you want to say it, if they're not important, then I would say, because it was just random luck that he perfectly, predicted the thing is about the character in The Last President is very much like Trump is. He's basically a person that's part of the ruling class that manages to, to make the normal people love him. But I think I'm just about out of time here. But yeah, is there any closing stuff you want to chat about?
Before we go, I'd just like to get your thoughts on what do you think is going on with these aliens from Mexico? Do you think they're real? They showed X-rays of them and things of that nature. What are your thoughts?
I think it's possible they could be real. In terms of real, like they were a actual entity at some point. But I also think, I think it's definitely somewhat likely that they're not real. And that because there's others way more interesting skulls in Peru that I think these are kind of like a distraction for, which are the Paracas skulls, which have their elongated skull humans, which there are elongated skulls where people they bind the skulls as babies to elongate them, but those skulls don't have higher cranial capacity. But these Paracas skulls do, and they have red hair. They have 20% higher capacity, and they have red hair. So they're completely different. And, we talked about the Nephilim stuff. The Nephilim were giants. They're not tiny little alien twinks.
Yeah.
So that's what they're, that's what my initial impression is that they're showing those things off to distract from the Paracas skulls, and basically they're just throwing everyone off the scent. They're like, they want you to think these are ancient aliens, but in reality, it's ancient Aryans, which are giant red and blonde beings, which is what the Nazis were talking about. But yeah, that's there you go. There's my take on those alien bodies.
Well, Drew, I really appreciate your time. I'm glad that we could finally get it done. Before we go, can you tell everybody one more time where to find you?
Yep, just x.com/@Drutang Reborn, DRU-Tang, TANG, Reborn, REBORN.
All right, brother. To the audience, thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time, Drew, thank you very much for your time, and have a good night.